They say silence heals. But that morning, silence was heavier than grief itself. Thick, golden, slow to move. And in the middle of it all stood a woman at the far end of the farmer's market, her stall small and almost invisible. No sign, no prices, just jars of amber light. People walked past her like she was made of mist, but I stopped, because sometimes the quietest people in town carry the loudest truths. I remember that day clearer than most. The wind had lost its warmth overnight, and by the time I reached the market, the air tasted like cold apples and sawdust. Farmers were shouting prices, chickens squawking, and a harmonica player near the bakery kept losing his rhythm every time a cart rolled by. But at the edge, just beyond the noise, she stood with her honey. No one seemed to notice her. Her stall was barely more than a wooden table with a linen cloth and a few old jars. No flowers, no decoration, no charm. Only those jars, lined up neatly as if they were the last sacred things in the world. When the sun hit them, the honey glowed like it had its own pulse. And in that light, I saw my own reflection looking back, tired, uncertain, trying to remember who I used to be before life grew so heavy. I walked closer. She didn't greet me, just nodded once, like someone who had been waiting for me all morning. Her hands were small and rough, and her sleeves were rolled just high enough to reveal a faint scar along her wrist. She lifted one jar, turned it slowly in her hand, and said softly, "This one's from clover that grew after the storm. Sometimes, sweetness hides where everything else has been broken." Her voice was steady, not soft, not trembling, just certain. It reminded me of the way my mother used to speak when she wanted to comfort without pretending. I asked her how long she'd been selling honey. She smiled faintly and said, "Long enough to know people don't really come here for honey. They come looking for something gentle to believe in again." That sentence stayed in my chest long after I left her table. The rest of the market was loud and ordinary. Children with caramel apples, a man arguing over cheese, someone's dog chasing a leaf. But I kept glancing back at her. She stood there the way a lighthouse stands, still, unbothered by the tide of voices around her. I bought a small jar, not because I needed it, but because I needed to remember how it felt to be seen quietly. That night, I opened it in the kitchen, and the scent, wildflowers and sunlight, filled the room like a hymn. I tasted it straight from the spoon. It wasn't sweet in the usual way. It was deep, like something aged, something earned. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel hollow. I felt still. Then I remembered her scar, the way her hand trembled for just a second when she'd lifted the jar, and I realized she wasn't just selling honey. She was healing through it, pouring something of herself into every jar, like people used to pour letters into bottles and throw them into the sea, hoping someone somewhere might understand. The next week, I went back. Her stall was gone. No jars, no cloth, only an empty space where the wood table had been, and a faint ring of honey on the ground, glinting in the morning light. I asked the man selling apples beside her if he knew where she went. He shrugged, said she only came once a year, No one knew her name. Some said she lived in the mountains, others that she'd lost someone and never spoke of it again. But everyone who'd ever bought her honey kept the jar, even when it emptied, like a quiet relic. That night, I held my jar under the lamp. Light caught the threads of gold that clung stubbornly to the glass, and I thought about all the people we pass by, the quiet ones, the invisible ones, who keep carrying sweetness in a world that keeps taking it. I thought of her words again. People don't come for honey. They come for something gentle to believe in again. Maybe she was right. Maybe the world breaks us just enough so that kindness has room to pour in. And maybe, when it does, it looks a lot like honey. The jar still sits on my shelf. Sometimes, when the day feels too heavy to lift, I hold it up to the light, and it reminds me that healing doesn't shout. It hums, quietly, persistently, like a promise that never needed words. But last week, while dusting the window frame beside it, I found something wedged in the wood, a small rusted nail, bent at the tip, half hidden by time. And somehow, I knew it had a story too. A story that didn't belong to the house, but to the hands that once built it. That's what I'll tell you next, in A Rusted Nail in the Frame. Follow the channel. Stay close, because every small thing in this house remembers more than it should. And I think it's finally ready to speak.